Hello and welcome to this, our final video of 3 on Voltaire's Candide. And in this video I should like to look at a small selection of themes and at the ending of Candide, with a particular emphasis on the notion of learning lessons and what, if anything, might be the moral of this text. And the first theme I'd like to pick up on in the text is that of sexuality. Sex in Candide is never romantic, unless you consider the Oreillon girls and their monkey lovers. It never leads to the birth of children. It's reduced to rape and prostitution, which repeatedly reminds us of the danger of STIs along the way. Take Cunigonde. This passive sexual object nonetheless has her more assertive moments. In chapter 8, she recounts how she witnessed the état de fait first-hand, and then she faints. She says to Candide, "À peine reprenais-je mes sens, after fainting, que je vous vis dépouillé tout nu. Ce fut là le comble de l'horreur, de la consternation, de la douleur, du désespoir." Now, that might seem rather unflattering when she says to Candide, "When I saw you topless, you know, it was the height of despair for me." Yet, having given this rather hyperbolic assertion of horror, her very next remark is, "Je vous dirai avec vérité que votre peau est encore plus blanche et d'une incarnate plus parfaite que celle de mon capitaine des Bulgares." It seems remarkable that in watching her beloved Candide being humiliated and tortured, all Cunigonde can think about is his smooth white skin. She became sexually aroused by seeing Candide all tied up and whipped. And when you think about it, we've seen Cunigonde do this before. Because if you think back to the first chapter, Pangloss catches an STI from Paquette in the woods. But did you notice that Cunigonde is also there, watching from the bushes, as you can read on screen? So here Voltaire satirises Pangloss through the language of learning, and when Cunigonde sees it, she decides that she would love to learn those kinds of lessons, if that's what a philosophy lesson looks like. Cunigonde's sexual being, then, was first created when she observed sexuality from afar as a non-participant. And it's notable that whenever men are near her, which, to be fair, is either when they're raping her or when they're owning her, this is bad. Whereas the distant Candide, because they get separated, is good. And I think that pattern is very much respected until the end, because at the end, when the two are united in Constantinople, after all that struggle, Candide ends up falling out of love with her, because she's got a bit weathered and haggard and is now a bit too ugly. Pangloss is hardly any better. Catching an STI and losing an eye from it have taught him nothing, because in chapter 28, Pangloss has come back from the dead for the third time, what a text, and recounts how he'd walked into a mosque. And rather than being like a normal scholar and admiring the architecture like a wise old doctor, his eyes start to wander onto a woman's bare chest as she prays. I don't quite know why this woman has a full bouquet of flowers rammed between her bosoms, but when she has, and when they fall out, Pangloss really takes his time with the flower arranging and putting them back for her. More audaciously for the time, Candide has its homosexual moments, which you might have missed. In chapter 4, Pangloss recounts how Tonderre-Tonton has been reduced to rubble. Cunigonde has been raped as much as one can be. That's not me being crass, it's what the text says on screen. She's been raped as much as one can be, but then Pangloss speaks of "mon pauvre pupille, traité précisément comme sa sœur." And in case we think, well, that might be another woman, the beauty of the French language is it's a gendered language. So we have mon pupille and traité in the masculine. That pupil can only be the Baron's son. And if he has been treated precisely like his sister, I won't paint a picture for you, but he's clearly been raped by male soldiers too. And a much later event would seem to corroborate this, because in chapter 28, the Baron's son, who has also come back from the dead for the second time, it's hard to keep track of all these resurrections, he tells Candide what he's been up to, and as it turns out, he's been to a gay sauna, or as close as one perhaps get to in the 1750s. Now, the Isoglan that we see on screen there were boys between the ages of 8 and 18, roughly, who were taken as a living tax from Christians living in the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans, the Turks, they would go into the occupied lands which were lived in by Christians, and rather than taking tax of money or salt, they would take boys. And when they took those boys, they would raise them as soldiers. I think they're called janissaries, actually. And at the time, there were rumours that these boys were also sometimes used for sexual favours by the older men. And so here we have the Baron's son innocently finding himself taking a naked bath with one of these young Isoglans. Now, that leads us to wonder, had the Baron always been gay? Or had his rape at Tondre-Tontonque somehow been some kind of perverse sexual awakening under horrible circumstances for him? But whatever the case may be, it's notable that this rather open confession receives no comment at all from Candide. Candide kind of awkwardly responds by saying to Pangloss, "So anyway, what are you doing here?" Was Candide embarrassed? Was he disgusted? Because this is less enlightened times for homosexuality, or perhaps a little bit of both. We can even detect gay undercurrents in some of Voltaire's criticism of religion and soldiers, because when Pangloss speaks of his STI from Paquette in chapter 4, he provides this ridiculous account of the disease's journey, its genealogy, if you like. And what we notice here is that as the list begins, or ends, depending on how you look at it, that's why I was hesitating, it begins with a series of homosexual encounters between, firstly, a page boy and a Jesuit priest, and then that Jesuit priest and a sailor. So those kind of stereotypes are there. So in these examples of homosexuality in the text, what I've done here is to encourage you to be really attentive to the small details, as I have done here, because they can sometimes actually be quite revealing, especially with more audacious material. Religion would be another one. In order to get away with saying naughty things, sometimes in early modern period, people would use libertine writing strategies to get away with saying these things without being arrested for publishing them. Let's look now at the ending. Chapter 30, the final chapter, the final destination of character and plot. Again, as with El Dorado, I'm going to give you more than one potential reading here, just to stress that there's no right or wrong answer, as long as you give an answer that is backed up by the text. We might first consider the notion of sociability. What's it like in this small holding? It is at the same time democratic and also meritocratic. In other words, people getting things according to their abilities. And let's just remember how the Baron's son has been excluded from this final destination. And that is by democratic consent. All of the characters are consulted apart from his sister, Cunegonde, who is not only deprived of her say, but also of the very knowledge that a vote's taking place. Each of the Baron's traits is deemed undesirable by the others. He's a Jesuit, he's a German, and so he needs to be punished, although interestingly his sexuality seems to remain something of an elephant in the room. The Baron's son's demise seems to derive from the fact that he is not compatible with the society that the others have etched out for themselves. He is an aristocrat who's rejected Candide's claims to marry Cunégonde because of Candide's lower birth. And it seems as if Candide actually only marries Cunégonde to annoy her brother. Candide, enfant de son cœur, n'avait aucunement envie d'épouser Cunégonde, mais l'impertinence extrême du baron le déterminait à conclure le mariage. He's called the baron. Don't forget, so at the beginning of the tale, the baron here is the baron's son. At the beginning of the tale, Tonder-Ton-Tronc is destroyed, and the kind of heads of the family, Tonder-Ton-Tronc, get killed. So at the beginning, Cunégonde's brother is the baron's son, but then by the end of the tale, he becomes the baron. So I might in the videos have called him baron or baron's son throughout. So, loyal then to the old feudal system of Tonder-Ton-Tronc, this aristo baron has no place in the group's newly formed meritocracy, where each person has a particular talent to offer or job to perform, be it cooking, gardening, or in the case of Cunégonde, doing the laundry. But again, things are just never quite so simple as that in Candide, are they? It's very clear that this final destination isn't actually a happy place for anyone. Candide marries Cunégonde not out of desire, which has now fizzled out along with Cunégonde's good looks, but out of the necessity imposed by his chivalric promise to her. So to play off what I've just said, it's actually quite interesting that the baron is rejected for being an aristocrat, old world blue blood, yet Candide marries Cunégonde out of chivalric, kind of old world gentlemanly duty. Everyone in the group has come to a point of rest, yet seems unhappy with their lot. Because Pangloss will never be the renowned scholar that he believes that his learning deserves. Cacambo suddenly feels himself cheated by destiny. The old woman becomes the very old woman, the very old and infirm woman. And then to cap it all off, Martin sits there telling everyone that everywhere in the world is equally miserable everywhere. Cunégonde has gone from idealised mistress and sexualised dream girl to a hideous object of chivalric necessity. Candide first learns of her new ugliness in chapter 27 and exclaims, "Ah, belle ou laide, je suis honnête homme." Again, that's the language of kind of chivalric aristocratic code. Et mon devoir est de l'aimer toujours. Candide is a man of his word, yet we already see a crack in this facade when just a few lines later he returns to the subject and mutters, "C'est bien dommage qu'elle soit devenue si laide." Candide, along with the baron's son, first sees Cunégonde looking a bit weathered in chapter 29. He's repulsed by the sight of her, as you can see in these two illustrations on screen, but marries her anyway. Candide, dans le fond de son cœur, however, n'avait aucune envie d'épouser Cunégonde. There does, however, seem to be a message in the closing of Candide with relation to philosophy and our engagement with it. Pangloss's worldview has repeatedly been satirised and disproved throughout the text. In the final chapter, Candide and Pangloss visit a wise old Turk called the Dervish. And when asked about the nature of evil in the world, the Dervish retorts with a notably deistic theory, according to which God the Creator forms the world, sets it in motion, and then sits back and watches events unfold. So if you've read any William Paley, you know, the idea of God as a clockmaker. God has made the world, made the clock, wound it up, and is now set it in motion, but he is in no way the one who's pushing the hands anymore. And so, well, that's a different example, not in the text. For the dervish says that the king, or even a captain of a boat, isn't interested in the comfort of the mice aboard the boat, if indeed they even realise that the mice are actually there. Yet crucially, that boat is going somewhere. It does have a trajectory. one which, although unknown to the little mice, is part of the wider plan of the Maker. In the face of all is for the best, then, the dervish instead suggests that there is at least a purpose to life, but that we, mere mortals, ought not to try to understand it. What can we do instead, then? We can work as a way of keeping boredom, vice, and need at bay. We can take to our fertile gardens and we can make the best of what we've got. So there's really a kind of neo-stoicism going on there. The idea that, you can't control what's going on in the outside world, but you can control your reaction to it. You can control your own world, manage your own body, clean up after yourself in your own home, etc. Travaillons sans raisonner, dit Martin. C'est le seul moyen de rendre la vie supportable. Or surely to give the most famous line of the book, which Candide in fact repeats twice, as if to insist upon it, Il faut cultiver notre jardin. We must cultivate our garden. Very famous line from the play. Il faut cultiver notre jardin. I don't think there's a clear-cut resolution or moral to Candide. Rather, we can each read into the ending and into Candide as a whole as we choose. For if the text demonstrates one thing to us, it is that in the face of the same threat of evil, of injustice, of tragedy, humanity nonetheless has a wide scope of different types of people with different beliefs and attitudes. And perhaps reflecting on this and on the outcome of the text, we too might do our best to do the best with what we have, with what we can give. And perhaps we too should strive to cultivate our own little gardens, whatever it is that happens to be growing there. I've been Dr. Adam Horsley. Thank you for listening to these 3 lecture videos on Voltaire's Candide.